Thank you very much to GapSummit for inviting me to present today. It's a great honor and a privilege, and I'm really pleased to have this forum to talk to so many aspiring young professionals in the field of biotech. My name is Joanna Dupont-Inglis. I'm Head of EU Affairs at European Bioplastics, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about in general about lobbying on biotech in the EU, and also about bioplastics in specifically. And the reason for this kind of split presentation, or two aspects to the presentation, is because when I was first approached by Becca to speak at GapSummit, I was actually still at Europa Bio, which is the European Association for Bioindustries. And since then, I've moved to a new position with European Bioplastics. But to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm based in Brussels. I've been here since 2000, but originally from the UK. I'm now a dual British-Irish national, and the DuPont part actually comes from a Belgian husband, so rather than an American chemical company. And as I said, I'm currently working as head of EU affairs for European Bioplastics. The team at European Bioplastics is based in Berlin, so I'm the only one in Brussels, and I'm here to work on European affairs for them. And prior to this, as I mentioned, I was at Europa Bio, which is the European Association for Bioindustries. I was there for roughly 11 years, and during that time, I worked as the Secretary General of the association. Before that, the Deputy Secretary General. And before that, for about 7 or 8 years, I worked as director for industrial biotech. So I had a fair amount to do with all three sectors of biotech that we worked on towards the end of my time at Europa Bio. So healthcare, biotech, agricultural biotech, and industrial biotech. But probably in most detail and for the longest time, I've worked on industrial biotechnology. So each of the different types of biotech, as you'll know, face different challenges when it comes to deployment, acceptance, understanding, awareness in the UK and across Europe and across the world, in fact. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about my experience of managing that during my time working in biotech. My academic background a long time ago was in environmental science and European studies, which I did at the University of Sussex, and a little bit in France with Erasmus. And then additional roles that I've had quite recently, one was as chair of the EU Bioeconomy Stakeholders Panel, because we did a lot of work around the bioeconomy that I'll also talk a little bit about later. And also as board member for Women in Life Sciences, which is a platform that I'm still active on, and as board member for SUSChem, which is a sustainable chemistry platform here in Europe. So moving on to the next slide. I know, or at least I thought, that you would be perhaps quite interested to know something about the potential overall economic impact of industrial biotech in terms of jobs and growth going forward. And during my time as Director for Industrial Biotech at Europa Bio, we conducted a study on this. So that would have been around 2016. And at the time, the findings of that study were that for industrial biotech, there currently were around 486,000 jobs in the industrial biotech value chain. And the estimated value of all the activity happening in that sector was around 31.6 billion. Another interesting fact about industrial biotech is it has a really high job multiplier effect. So that means that for every one job in industrial biotech, there are 4 jobs created somewhere else, either upstream, downstream, or indirectly. So it's one of those industries that really reaches quite far into all different sectors. Then just to complement this, we also looked at what the expected employment and economic contribution would be of industrial biotech in 2030. And this shows that basically the number of people who are going to be working in the sector almost doubles between now and 2030, and can go as high as 1.5 million in the EU. And this is predicted to contribute between 57 and 99 billion euros to the EU economy. So it's often thought of as kind of quite a niche sector, quite a small sector, but actually it's quite significant in its own way. A few more figures here. This came out last week, I think, and this is from an institute called the Nova Institute based in Cologne, and also the Biobased Industries Consortia, which brings together a lot of different industries active in the bioeconomy. And they periodically do a check on what the turnover is, what the jobs figures are in the bioeconomy. And as you can see here, the overall turnover is 2.4 trillion euros and 18.5 million individuals. And you can see this little green segment here that shows that the chemicals and plastics part of bio-based industries is not huge compared to some of the other sectors, but we're looking here at all kinds of things like pulp and paper and all kinds of other production, food and feed from the bioeconomy. So it's not insignificant, and it is growing. So moving on from that, what I do day to day and what I've been doing here in Brussels for over 20 years now is working in EU policy. And basically, it's the main part of the job. When you think about what is it and how do we do it, it's really trying to influence the development of EU policy to enable the uptake of innovative and sustainable technologies. So here we're working together with industry, and you'll sit together with your industry group and you'll talk about the challenges, the opportunities, what the value proposition is, what kind of a framework you need, what's working, what isn't working, and then you formulate your positions, and you need to take them then to your policymakers and also to your stakeholder community to try and gather support for those to enable you to grow as an industry. And working in biotech, it's probably not the easiest lobbying sector to work in, but you find that, you know, where the challenges are greatest, sometimes in lobbying, there's the greatest scope for doing work. So with biotech, I would say it's very difficult to sum it up, and we only have a limited time here, but in terms of the things that you're trying to convey, it's about the benefits of the technology. And now we all have climate change mitigation on our minds. We also have COVID and how to tackle that. We're thinking about how to contribute to the circular economy, make people healthier, live longer, healthier lives. The pressure that there is on resources on the planet, growing population, growing demand for food, feed, everything, materials, and the challenge that poses for biodiversity as well. So you're looking at those types of issues and highlighting the contribution that biotech and bioplastics can make in that respect. And also looking at jobs and economic growth. So where could jobs be created? What kind of economic growth could we bring to try and improve prosperity and general outcomes? The sorts of things that you're dealing with biotech and to a certain extent bioplastics as well is perception. With biotech, everybody knows there's challenges around perception, particularly some would identify this with agricultural biotech more than with other kinds of biotech. And for sure, that's something that's a really significant challenge in the EU and elsewhere in the world. For biopharmaceuticals, there's other challenges that you'll be aware of. So it's things like incredibly high or long-term levels of financing needed, the need for IP and stable frameworks. And then you're looking at a really high failure rate in terms of trying to find new therapies and tackle some of the most difficult unmet medical needs that we have. including things like cancer and Alzheimer's, but also genetic conditions. So there's a big challenges there, and for the healthcare side. For the industrial side, industrial biotech, I always found that one of the biggest challenges was that people just don't know what it is. And if people generally would think about biopharmaceuticals, they could imagine in their head a pill or a pharmacy or something like that. That may not be inaccurate, but it's at least it's a tangible representation. Same with the agricultural side of things. You can imagine a crop, and you can imagine it being GM or it being organic or it being conventional. But it's harder to understand industrial biotech, what it's for, why it's important, where it goes. So that's something that we spent a lot of time on, linking it up with things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and trying to show people how actually industrial biotech is in your everyday life, in terms of anything that's been produced through fermentation, and including cheese and wine and beer and all kinds of things, but also the role that it plays in a renewable economy for the future. Because as you know, it's a conversion technology that's going to enable us to produce a lot more resource efficiently and using renewable raw materials instead of fossil carbon increasingly as well. So the other kind of general challenges that anybody really faces if they're lobbying, and perhaps even more so sometimes in Europe, is there's a huge amount of fragmentation, cultural differences, language barriers, all those kinds of things. The technology itself and bioplastics, as an example of it, are complex, not always that easy to explain. There's often a need for significant investment in these sectors, infrastructure, development, and we tend to be told very often, and I think it's true, that we have a very risk-averse attitude in Europe when compared to other parts of the world. So difficult to compete sometimes. In terms of the vision of European bioplastics, where I work now, it's pretty simple, and it's to drive evolution of plastics, contributing significantly to a sustainable society. So we've all seen the Attenborough documentaries, the horrible images of plastic soup and plastic pollution, and we want to find ways of doing things better, which incorporates the reduce, reuse and recycle mantra. So reducing the pressure, but also getting the benefits from plastics in the terms of, in the way in which that they actually do help reduce waste in certain instances. And our mission also is to align the bioplastics value chain and work in partnership with stakeholders towards creating a favourable landscape, enabling the bioplastics markets to grow. So there's a lot about talking to different sectors. It could be farmers, it could be producers of vegetable oils, it could be starch, it could be different politicians from different member states. There's an awful lot of talking to the media, trying to explain what the situation is and what the benefits are. So a lot of talking and lots of meeting. Just a little bit about European Bioplastics. It's been around for 25 years, started quite small in 1993 with 12 members, grew to 50 in 2005, and today there's around 70 members of the association. So this slide just shows you some of them. Most of them, many of them are quite small, so you probably wouldn't recognize them. There's some larger ones in there that you would notice, or would sound familiar to you, perhaps, like Cargill, Neste maybe, BASF, others in there. And so the membership brings together renewable raw material, green chemistry companies, bioplastics manufacturers, bioplastics distributors, converters, the people who make the machinery, research and consulting, and finally end users. So in there would be companies that you would recognize the names of, probably like Danone, Ferrero, Lavazza, and Tetra Pak. They're all interested in trying to move towards more sustainable plastics for the future. So what are they? Well, the problem is it is quite difficult to explain. It's one of those things that's easy when you know, but otherwise difficult to get your head around. So there's also kind of a low level of information and knowledge, and this leads to quite a lot of misconception and false expectations. It can be an emotionally charged subject because particularly in past years, there's been around the growth around biofuels. There was a lot of concern around food versus fuel, land use, also about whether or not GM crops are used to make bioplastics. And then marine pollution is obviously on everybody's mind. And there has been in the past potential for greenwashing as well. I mean, with products claiming to be bioplastics when they actually aren't, which is why certification has been so vital and important in ensuring that changes. In terms of where they are, they're kind of all around you. You might find them in your coffee capsules if they're compostable. That would be bioplastics. They're also in disposable, compostable catering tableware. They're in bin liners. They're in cars. They're in cosmetics. They're basically they're in toys. People are increasingly, or many brands are increasingly looking to see how they can source from renewable raw materials rather than from fossil carbon, and reduce waste in that way. And unlike conventional plastics, which are made from fossil oil, bio-based plastics, many are derived from renewable resources. So the kind of feedstocks that they use, they can be things that are rich in starch, such as corn or sugarcane. They can be lignocellulosic, like wood. They can be organic waste feedstocks, and they go into making a range of different products at the end. So this is where it confuses people and gets a little bit complex, but it's not something that is insurmountable as to understand. But the main thing to know is that you can have bioplastics that are not made from renewable raw materials. They can be made from fossil. These would be the biodegradable ones. But a lot of them are made from renewable raw materials to some extent, or completely. And there's a range of how much the materials are made from renewable raw materials. So these are the different types of plastics. You may have heard of them. PET is the one that you find in all your water bottles and fizzy drink bottles and that kind of thing. And so you can have bio-based PET as well as fossil-based PET. So a few different types to get to know. And basically what we're looking at here on this slide is just the renewability of the cycle for bioplastics. So the fact that you're growing them basically through growing the renewable raw materials, or if you're using compostables, you're helping return organic waste through recycling to make compost and biogas. And so in that way, you're kind of closing the loop. So bioplastics, we say, are really crucial to the development of the bioeconomy. They're a really high market, high value sector, even if they're not a huge sector at the moment. They do help create jobs right up and down the value chain. So also in rural areas and coastal areas where some of the renewable raw material is sourced from. So in that way, they help strengthen rural development and investment in biorefineries. They obviously have an important role to play in reducing GHG emissions and in using more renewable carbon instead of fossil carbon, because we're taking it out of the atmosphere, obviously, rather than out of the ground. And then biodegradable and compostability present really interesting new options for recycling and gathering unavoidable food waste and converting that. So what we do know also is that we have an important need for more favourable legislative framework to enable this technology. And there are some bits and pieces that are coming together that are helping. And one of these things is the circular economy package that the Commission has launched recently, which also links to the bioeconomy. And it's important that you can't really have one without the other. You need to have a good synergy between the bioeconomy and the circular economy, and that already exists. And then in addition, there's another piece which is on the Commission's roadmap to a strategy on plastics. And the idea behind this is partly to decarbonize the plastics industry, or we would say defossilize, and to also increasingly manage the efficiency of plastic recycling and waste management systems. So bioplastics have a need for a supportive framework in the development of these pieces of legislation to enable them to reach more consumers and more markets. So we have these policy initiatives that are coming up all the time that are where there's a big positive contribution for bioplastics to make, but we also have gaps that need to be filled. So these include things like EPR rules. So this is extended producer responsibility. Producers are increasingly being called on to take responsibility for their waste, to compensate and pay for the expense of dealing with the waste is causing. And at European Bioplastics, we would also like some of these fees that are paid to go to, for example, to composters, so who are currently not really receiving any funding. This would go mainly to mechanical recycling for conventional plastics. A carbon tax could be pretty interesting as well. And green public procurement would be very helpful for growing markets. So that's something that we would also really appreciate. In the US some time ago, Obama made a federal purchasing order for bio-based products, and that involves buying bio-based products for the Navy, which did a lot to help grow markets in the US, and we would like to see those kind of initiatives in Europe as well. And then support for compostable materials in specific applications. So there's some applications where, particularly where plastics come into contact with food, and it's very difficult to separate them. So again, you could think as an example, your coffee capsule that you might put in your an espresso machine or similar. There, separating the coffee grounds from the container that they arrive and leave in is a very impractical, expensive, and energy intensive, and water intensive as well. So if you had that container as a compostable that you could put in with your kitchen waste, with the organic waste from your kitchen, that can be composted industrially, and it would be good to see more applications like that coming online. And then in terms of implementing and increasing efficient waste management infrastructure in Europe, it's pretty patchy. Some member states have really sophisticated waste capturing, sorting, recycling, and other member states have much further to go in that respect. So investments needed there. So in summary, looking at the benefits of bioplastics as an example of an end product from industrial biotech, they offer a lot in terms of climate protection and resource efficiency, the use of annually regrown crops, having greater security of supply in some ways, less volatile than oil, reducing the amount of oil that we extract and fossil resources that we depend on, and reducing the imports. We know we don't really make that much fossil in Europe anyway. And then in terms of cascading use, very important benefits for industrial use and energy production, and an increased use of platform chemicals. So a lot of scope for renewable chemicals as well in the future. There's plenty of new functionalities that people are investing in innovating for different industries, for different end users. Many brands looking into this, as I mentioned, to see what new functionalities can be made from renewable chemicals and bioplastics, and then a range of options for end of life as well. Then there's also the social dimension, where consumers are increasingly looking for sustainability in the products that they buy. The potential for job creation and security is very important coming out, obviously, of COVID. Everybody is expecting, the COVID crisis to be followed by climate crisis, to be followed by recession crisis, to be followed by biodiversity crisis. So more that can be done to build back better in that respect is also good, and potential for development in rural areas. So that's the end of my presentation for today. I'd be delighted to answer your questions. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session that we're about to have. And you're also more than welcome to contact me on the email address shown on this slide. So thank you very much to GapSummit, and looking forward to talking to you more.